Good day, my friends. Welcome once again to Kaya, our study series on the Bible for life and light. We are now on the 7th episode of this series, and today we will focus our reflection on the remaining themes of Genesis chapter 1, and that is the Sabbath and the blessedness and goodness of God's creation. We can start with chapter 1 verse 31 of chapter 1 verse 31, which says, God saw everything he had made, and indeed it was very good. This was how God ended his work of creation on the 6th day, with an exclamation of divine satisfaction, with great delight over what has been accomplished so far. So God saw everything that he has done, and lo, it was not just good, it was very good. Yeah, the goodness of creation as God saw it is not actually referring to any ethical or moral goodness in the character or quality of creation. Those things belong more to the legal pronouncements of Moses or the law, or to the socio-ethical pronouncements of the prophets through their oracles. The goodness that God is seeing here is the aesthetic delight and real joy that the Creator is experiencing at the sight of his own creation. Perhaps we can simply call it as beautiful, lovely, pleasing, so delightful to the eyes of the Creator. So he was just so happy taking in the view of his whole creation. Creation actually started as something that God himself finds real delight in beholding, as it was all so very good. Note, there was no indication whatsoever of anything negative here, nor anything ugly at all, in spite of the fact that our priestly writers, we have identified them earlier, are making this declaration from a not so delightful, not so beautiful situation in their exile in Babylon. In spite and despite of the seeming ugliness, the despairing distortions and contradictions in their present historical reality, still our writers make this firm declaration of faith. This is part of the Lord's creation. This is my Father's world, and this is part of what the Lord has described as good and very good. So no historical, political, and economic defeat and ugliness, along with the spiritual and emotional despair of the moment, can erase the inherent goodness and beauty of God's creation. Those who seem to discern only what is ugly, what is so despairing in their experience, and also for those who think and feel the same in our time, are reminded of this basic opening article of faith in this creation story. This is essentially a call to faith, an affirmation of hope and trust in the abiding goodness of God's being and intention for the whole creation, even if our present reality may be saying something else. Thus, the whole work of God in creating the heavens and the earth, which he saw as very good, was carried out and finished in 6 days. And then on the seventh day, God rested from all the work he had done. Simply put, God took a holiday and relaxed from his work of creating, sustaining, and redeeming his creation. Here is the beginning of the tradition and institution of the Sabbath. Sabbath, or Shabbat in Hebrew, simply means to rest, or a cessation from all kinds of work as demonstrated by God himself. God took his rest on the seventh day, not because he got tired and became so exhausted. He rested to show the whole creation that there is always a time for life to be lived in serenity and peace, while appreciating the beauty and goodness of life and relationships in his own creation. God took his rest on the seventh day to set the pattern as to how life is to be lived in the regular routines, duties, and responsibilities we undertake. Life is not to be defined by pure and non-stop feverish labor and daily grind just to secure the basic and other needs in our life. We may always be referring to God as a God who is always at work. God, yes, is always at work in his creation. There is a passage there in Ephesians telling about how God, he keeps on working for the completion of his creation. But one thing is clear: God also finds time to rest and cease from his creative labor. This is to show the world how life is to be lived in relationship with our Creator and with the rest of creation. Sabbath is an act of faith and trust in our Maker, that even if the whole world stops, takes a pause, and stops working for a day, it will not disintegrate. It will not be reduced into a state of deprivation, for still the whole world remains a safe and good state in God's hands. It will continue to be the same benevolent, generous world, even if we don't do anything to disturb it. Observing Sabbath means we are confidently returning to God all our cares, all our concerns for security and stability. During Sabbath, we are allowing God to just take over our lives. It is a statement of faith that even if we stop working and just rest, we will still be sustained. We will be nourished, not by our own efforts, but by the power and grace of our Creator God. Sabbath is actually setting the pattern for a new humanity being willed by God for his creation. A humanity that finds its ultimate security, economic security, even political security, not in earnest and feverish human striving to possess and grasp and grab more and more. Rather, a Sabbath-observing humanity is one that declares to the whole world the end of the culture of greed, grabbing and possessing more than what we actually need, and the birth of a counter-culture of sharing, community cooperation, and selfless devotion to the God who provides. Sabbath actually is a revolutionary concept. It defines by itself what the real life of shalom or real peace should really be like. It is not a life filled with wealth, accumulated possessions, privileges, positions of power, and status. It is actually living in community, observing the Sabbath principle, giving due respect and recognition to what God has done and is doing for them and for each other. It is living life in community, in a relationship of trust in God and with each other. This also serves as a counter message to what the dominant society in Babylon has been proclaiming and practicing, that of a Sabbathless society. This is when society no longer recognizes any distinction between the work and prerogatives of the divine and that of the human. When society simply becomes obsessed with day-to-day efforts to securing security, wealth, power, privilege, without any respite, living life simply on their own terms and not God's. We are actually now witnessing in our own time the emergence of this Sabbathless world. This is a tendency that keeps on recurring even and especially in our contemporary society that has become so attuned to the ways of relentless, non-stop profit-making and materialist consumerism and material possession-keeping without let-up and advancing oneself at the expense of the other. This is when Sundays are no longer observed as a time to observe our own Sabbath, and instead of filling the church to worship and thank God, we actually crowd the malls to keep cool, watch a movie, and look at the latest offers that are on display and on sale. In Sabbath, we find a refreshing good news. There is an alternative way of life, possible for everyone who believes, and for those who decide to follow. The Lord will always provide. God will never ignore those who truly trust in Him. Sabbath rest is a gift which we should really cherish with gratitude as we observe it with serious attention to its meaning and significance for our life of faith. Finally, the Lord gave His blessing to a number of creatures. First, God blessed the living creatures of the seas and the sky that He brought forth in verse 22. And second, God also blessed the humans, yes, that were created in the divine image. And third, God then blessed the Sabbath. You may ask, why only these three got blessed by God? Sana all. Huh? But in general, the world that God created is a blessed, good world. God's very special favor rests upon each creature, especially the human being. The human being is destined to live in a world filled with God's blessings for life and light. And for those who would faithfully observe the blessed institution of the Sabbath, the experience of having a regular, weekly, intimate, and restful communion with God, this provides for a guaranteed gift for a life that is truly blessed, filled with a spiritual richness, deep joy, and wholeness that can never be compared to any material possession and position acquired and accumulated by anyone. I do hope this lesson and the rest of our discussion on Genesis 1 has been helpful to you in your search for spiritual meaning and depth in our continuing journey of faith through the study of our scriptures. So, next week, our lesson will begin our reflection series on chapter 2 of Genesis. So, please read in advance in order for you to get acquainted with the flow of the story before we actually begin discussing the text. And so once again, thank you very much for joining us, and hope you will continue to be with us in the following episodes of our program. God bless.